This summer, my family and I went to the library early in Rhode Island, which is where we spend part of the summer, to choose some books. They went one way, and I wandered into the biography section. My eyes fell on Doris Kearns Goodwin's book, Team of Rivals, The Political Genius of Abraham Lincoln. Not exactly light summer reading at nearly 800 pages, but I picked it up and it didn't disappoint. Who's read the book? Has anyone read the book? Goodwin has this gift. She doesn't just write history, she lets you sit in the front row as it unfolds. And as I read, I was struck by Lincoln's extraordinary ability to read a moment, to see the people before him in all their flaws and gifts, and to hold vision, dignity, and kindness even in the midst of chaos and profound disruption and despair. When I finished the book, I had tears in my eyes, tears for the devastation of his era, but also for the resilience and hope that rose up in the midst of it all. Perhaps my desire to read books of history, actually I had read another book of hers the previous summer about her husband and her in the 1960s. Perhaps reading books of history is a way to escape the present reality and all the horror that is unfolding in our own time. Perhaps it is also a way to search for greater understanding, inspiration, and comfort in recognizing that while the times we are living in feel unprecedented, other centuries and eras went through trials and tribulations, and we are not alone in it all. And maybe that's why I love Torah too. Mining the depth of our tradition does the same thing for me. To see the story unfold and look at the intricacies of the commentaries. Our rabbis treated Torah as a living sacred story that can be turned over and over again. Hafoch ba v'hafoch ba, dekula ba. Everything is in it. Turn it over and over again in order to help us make meaning in our own time. For thousands of years, no matter what the context, the commentators, rabbis of old, and we have unfolded the story of our Torah generation after generation, to receive it, to be strengthened by it, to be challenged, to gain courage, and to be humbled by this eternal story. This week's Parashat Ki Tetze, is filled with laws, 70 of them, some inspiring, some bizarre, some difficult, some troubling. And I want to look at one specific one of those troubling passages, which is in chapter 5, verse 1, which can be found on 1132. Becca texted me yesterday afternoon, because she was speaking last night, and said, "What are you speaking about?" So I said, flogging. So I said, I don't think that was what you were planning to speak about. So trigger warning, flogging. Here is the passage. When there is a dispute between men and they go to the law, and a decision is rendered declaring the one in the right and the other in the wrong, if the guilty one is to be flogged, the magistrate shall have him lie down and be given lashes in his presence by count, as his guilt warrants. He may be given up to 40 lashes, but not more, lest being flogged further to excess, your brother be degraded before your eyes. At first glance, of course, this seems far away from us. And of course, actually, if you look at the history, once the Second Temple was destroyed, this text wasn't actually actualized. Flogging kind of disappeared as a punishment. I know, obviously, that exists in our world in different places. But what's interesting is all the commentaries that I'm going to share about how they are thinking about this text weren't living at a time when it was actually used, which is true of many of the mitzvot in the Torah. There's a number of stonings in our parasha as well. It's not, most of the commentaries in trying to explain something were explaining something that didn't exist anymore. And so they're trying, the rabbis It's far away from them too, because it's not happening before them, and yet they have to insist that every word of the Torah is eternal, even the hard ones. And so they ask why, or what about it, or let's try to understand it better. And one of the foci that they look at in this particular passage is why 40 lashes are given. Why 40? Which may seem inconsequential, because even one to us may sound like more than enough. But they look at the question, why 40? Now I just want to take a pause for a moment to ask a question of the Kahal. What do you think some of the answers are given about why 40? Yeah. Okay, more than that will kill you. So that is true, that they're concerned about the health of the person. But they could have chosen a different number. Why 40 if you're thinking in a rabbinic mind? What? The number of days Moshe was at Sinai. That's one possibility. Other where 40 is important. 40 years in the desert. Excellent. Anything else? Okay, that's a good start. So the rabbis look at 40 and they think 40 isn't a random number, just like 7 isn't a random number in the tradition. 40 means something. And so they read into this idea about why 40 a number of different things. Now again, I want to remind us they're reading into something that is not done anymore in order to give it meaning, right? The flogging was a punishment for a number of negative mitzvot that people, if someone sinned and transgressed a negative mitzvah in the Torah, there are a number of them, which is when flogging was a punishment, because the Torah doesn't actually say it specifically. And so the rabbis are thinking in the framework of what is punishment about and why 40. So the first response is that actually the tradition says, and it lives in Midrash Tanchuma, that 40 days is the time it takes for life to be formed. When a human fetus is formed, this is Torah science or rabbi science. I'm not going to ask the doctors in the room, but there are many expressions of that. And so Midrash Tanchuma says it's 40 because 40 is a number that speaks to the creation of a human being. And therefore, what the flogging, the 40 represents in regard to this is saying, you've lost your humanity, reborn, be reborn. There's the possibility of finding your humanity again when you sinned. Allow yourself to be reborn, return to humanity, and restore the divine image in you. Right? That's one way to think about it. Also in Midrash Tanchuma, it speaks to someone said that Moshe spent 40 days on Har Sinai receiving the second set of tablets after the sin of the golden calf. So the 40 then represents renewed revelation because the person transgressed the Torah, right? The person transgressed the revelation, and when you transgress, as if you pushed it away, you're in exile from the Torah, you're in exile from God. And so this 40 represents renewed revelation, having the opportunity to receive the Torah once again and return to God, just as Israel was restored after the Egel HaZahav, the golden calf. So too the sinner is restored in this case. Rabbeinu Bachya, a Spanish rabbi of the mid-13th century to early 14th century, says that 40 years, as someone says, was the punishment in the wilderness for the Israelites accepting the report of the majority of the spies, the 10 spies who gave a bad report of the land. And one of the major assessments of the Israelites in that moment is that they had a lack of faith, right? They couldn't see the possibility. They saw only the fear. They didn't have faith. And so in this case, you could say that 40 represents the possibility of a restoration of faith and possibility for the sinner and the journey that it takes to get there. Finally, the Bnei Yissachar, who's a Hasidic commentary, makes the leap to our very season that we're in, because 40 also is from the beginning of Rosh Chodesh Elul to Yom Kippur is also 40. It also mirrors, by the way, the story of the golden calf episode, right? When Moshe breaks the tablets on the 17th of Tammuz and we make our walk, right, to basically Yom Kippur. So the Bnei Yisachar says it's the 40 days from Rosh Chodesh Elul to Yom Kippur. Just as the body can be struck to awaken the heart, which is the idea of the flogging, so too the soul is shaken during these days to awaken to tshuva. He says essentially that lashes are not physical but spiritual. And we do actually, we beat our chests in confession is not to wound, but to awaken the heart, and tshuva is our chance to be born again. So this is when you think you could read many of the laws in this week's parasha, amongst many things within the Torah that are deeply hard. We can say lots of things about the Torah, its patriarchy, its misogyny that exists. But the rabbis don't let it lie there. They take something because they have to find meaning in it. We don't always agree with how they describe it, but in this case, they take something that was a punishment and they look at it in the framework of uncovering a vision of what rebirth, renewal, and restoration is by taking it out of its practical consequences, which weren't alive anymore for them because people weren't doing the punishment, and saying, actually, this means something bigger. When we sin, we are exiled from God. We need renewal, we need renewed revelation, and we need to find a path to find faith again. And that, I think, is one of the amazing things that I fell in love with the tradition, is because things don't stay where they are. They have a birth of possibility over time. From a law about flogging, the rabbis over time uncovered a vision of rebirth, renewal, and restoration. But even they did something else. This is actually earlier. The Bnei Yisachar is in the 19th century. But very early on in the Mishnah and the Talmud, the rabbis did something even more radical. They said, the Torah says 40 lashes, right? But we will never allow more than 39. Does that ring a bell to anyone either? That Shabbos. Becca said Shabbos, because the malachot, the prohibitions of work on Shabbat are considered 40 minus 1. I'm not going to do back and forth here, but thank you. The quiz is over. And so the rabbis say that we should never allow more than 39. So they change the Torah understanding. They say you can do less than 39, and why is that? Goes back to Joy's point, which is that people are fragile and people's health is fragile, and so they want the person who's asked to give the punishment to be aware of the impact on it of the person. Not everyone is the same, and they have to take into consideration the health of the person and their ability to tolerate the punishment. So that's a reason for it, but the rabbis say you can never exceed 39. Why? Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein, who was the Rosh Hashiva of Har Zion in Israel, who lived from 1933 to 2015, elaborates on the Torah's insistence of not exceeding the 40, which eventually halachically becomes 39, as follows. This was done, by the way, in a letter that he wrote publicly after the Lebanon War, when Prime Minister Sharon declared that he wouldn't do an investigation on what happened in Sabra and Shatila. So Aharon Lichtenstein wrote an open letter that was published to him. And he says, it's a very powerful letter. Maybe we'll share it in full over the Chagim, we're not sure yet. But here is what he says. This is just a glimpse of the letter. I think the reason is clear. Even a kind and humane person who would never initiate violence may feel differently when carrying out the punishments of a court. Once the system is in motion, it's easy for the court agent to add a blow or two out of pride or zeal for justice, or simply to round out the number, to go from 39 to 40. Thus, precisely in this context where the danger of overruling and diminishing human dignity is greatest, the Torah warns that exceeding the limit renders the punisher liable. Lichtenstein understood that justice/punishment in this case can be a dangerous thing. Once the blows begin, it's easy to lose sight of the human being before you. Easy to cross the line from justice into cruelty. By the way, anyone who's ever visited anyone in prison will see this in spades. In spades. And so the rabbis drew the line, not 40, but at most 39, giving primacy to the idea of limiting oneself and of mercy, to think that that should be a guiding force. And this is also expressed even more powerfully in the second half of the pasuk. I'm just going to read the pasuk again. He may be given up to 40 lashes, but not more, which then the rabbis read as 39, lest being flogged further to excess, lest achicha, your brother, be degraded before your eyes. The Yiddish commentary of the early 17th century, Tzena Ore'ena, on the same pasuk says, on the section, let your brother be degraded before your eyes, our sages says, when he has suffered the lashes, then he is your brother. You should not denigrate him and shame him more. This is expiation for his sin. He got his punishment. Therefore, it is written here, achicha, your brother. Your brother, the word your brother, has the same numerical value of 39. Which, anyone want to do the math? Achicha is Aleph, which stands for 1, Chet is 8, Yud is 10, and Chaf is 20. 39. So they're making the equation that the 39 equals the idea that the person should be restored to make them your brother. You shouldn't denigrate them more or to not see them as a human being. This understands that there is a tendency also to continue to punish those who have sinned, even after they've received their punishment. Our country does that also over and over again for people who have served their time in prison. I have a lot of feelings about the judicial system, having visited someone in prison for 15 years. Or to hold the power of a sin that someone committed over and over again, them. And I think most of us have read Brian Stevenson's book that says you aren't the worst thing that you committed, that sometimes we only see the sin someone committed and we don't actually see them as a whole person even after they've actually served their time or received their punishment. No, the rabbis teach, after the 39, after the punishment has been fulfilled, we have to allow someone to return to become our sibling again, to see them in all their humanity and to open up our hearts to them as a brother or sister or a sibling. But there's another reason that's given for their 39 in Iturei Torah, which is Gems of Torah, by Rabbi David Moshe of Chorto, who said, if a person were to receive the full 40 lashes, they might believe their sin was wiped away completely and think no more of it. But at 39, the work is not finished. The punishment alone is not enough. One must continue to examine their ways, to keep growing, to keep returning. It's an incredible, this is also where our tradition is amazing. What a powerful balance. On the one hand, there's a strong drive towards mercy and restoration, right, for the person who has sinned. And on the other hand, there's this notion of responsibility. 39 says both. You are my brother, you are restored, And also, don't stop here. Tshuva is not a box that you can check off. Tshuva is a lifelong work of the soul. And that's what the 39, according to all these teachings, represent. There's one more story I'd like to share about this section of the Torah reading, which comes from the Talmud in Makot, which says that Rava, who's one of the great sages of the 4th century, said, "How foolish are the people who stand when a Torah scroll passes." Now, we were all just those fools, according to Rava. "For in the Torah it is written 40 lashes, and the sages came and made it 39. And he says we should be standing for the sages that walk by, not only for the Torah. Rava is marveling at the audacity of the rabbis. The Torah says 40. The Torah is divinely given according to the rabbis. But the sages had the courage to subtract 1, to change the Torah, to bend the Torah to mercy and responsibility, to choose dignity over degradation, and also to do what I think they considered tshuva itself on the Torah, right? To change the Torah to make it even more divine in some way, you could say. What Lincoln did in his time, which I spent my summer in the soup of his story, was incredible in looking at every moment and all the possibilities that emerged to try to find a way forward that would give a chance at this country. And he even his enemies, he even brought close. Is somewhat the sages did in their time. And in many ways, I think is what we're called to do in our time, although none of us are those sages and none of us are Lincoln. We can only be who we are supposed to be ourselves. Is to read a moment with wisdom, to act with courage, and to insist on the dignity of every human being. So here we are in these 40 days from Elul to Yom Kippur. We strike our chest. We'll be doing that a lot on Yom Kippur and in Slichot. Not to degrade ourselves, but to awaken the heart. Each bead is not 40 lashes of punishment, but 39 calls to mercy, 39 calls to rebirth, 39 calls to affirm our ability to faith in tomorrow. And that's a huge effort these days, to believe that there's going to be a good tomorrow. But that's part of what our work is to do, to believe there's a possibility of restoration, to believe that we can change. 39 reminders, no matter what we have done, that we are still our brothers. We are still brothers and sisters. We are still God's children, still worthy of restoration. And 39 calls to remind ourselves that the people we perceive as the other are also human beings, and that sometimes justice can become vengeance and violence. And our rabbis, our sages, in this one little mitzvah in the Torah, give a very, very strong warning against morphing justice into cruelty. Lincoln reminds us that the story can be rewritten with vision and dignity and can survive even devastation. We still bear the blessings of his wisdom. We're still struggling for some of the same things he struggled. Our sages remind us that the Torah itself, that Judaism itself, must be renewed along with each of us. It must pursue justice, and it must awaken mercy, and it also must demand responsibility of us. And I fear that we are in danger as Jews of losing our humanity in these very difficult times. The choices of how we move forward, particularly in this season, are in our hands. How do we capture a voice of a moral, of an inspired, of a loving Judaism? That is in our hands. So may we have the courage to subtract 1 or 2 or 3 when needed, to choose restraint and dignity, to shake our souls up, to turn these 40 days into a season of mercy, of possibility, of rebirth, a season when the pounding of our chests will awaken an overflow of love from our heart, and a season that we might turn to each other and call one another brothers and sisters, siblings of all the earth. Shabbat Shalom.